programs in more than 50 countries spanning across 5 continents. He has led the transformation of infrastructure and information protection to a services-based organization, providing increased efficiencies in the areas of compute, storage, network, risk, privacy, compliance, and mobility. There's a little bit of background before Starbucks. Dave held a variety of technical and leadership roles at organizations, including PetSmart, Amazon, Sun Microsystems, and Boeing. And currently, he sits on a number of boards, helping organizations and associations achieve higher levels of security awareness. And Dave, many of the participants on this webinar today, as you know, are current participants or past participants in our Professional Development Academy. And so they've already had the benefit, most of them, from insights, based on the videos that you provided, and, a part of the building of the program, all the way back to 2014 when we launched the Academy. So I want to thank you for that, and thank you for contributing to the Academy, back then and throughout the program as we've been involved, and we've had you on a number of our cybersecurity calls with that program. And with that, I want to make sure that you know how much we appreciate your effort to make leaders better. And so, Dave, what we want to do is we want to be able to, hear from you and hear your story and really your leadership journey. And then we also, ask for some questions ahead of time, and we ask for them throughout. And so we'll get to that as well. And so with that, Dave, I'm going to kind of turn it over to you for a little bit here, and be able to let you share your leadership insights and journey.
Great, thank you. The pleasure is certainly mine. So I think I think I'll go back. One of the areas that people most often ask about my journey and kind of how I crafted my career specifically to get into security. And that was, it was a purposeful journey. So I started my career at Boeing in software development and kind of moved into a variety of infrastructure roles, including kind of a blended infrastructure software development role for a particular organization at Boeing. And early 2000s, I found myself working at a startup, and one of the things that we did as part of this this organization, because they were bought by a large housewares company, we had a very large project that came across, and there wasn't capacity within the teams to be able to address the initiative, and so we chose to outsource that particular initiative. And at the time, it kind of seemed to be the theme within corporate America is to highly leverage resources overseas to fill capacity needs or gaps. And I have a finance degree as well as a computer science degree, and at the time I was reading Good to Great by Jim Collins. And he talks about in that book for companies to move from good to great, if they're not number one or number two in a particular area or a particular vertical, they should look to exit that. And taking a look at what we were doing at the time with offshoring some of the development activity and looking at the cost of that compared to the cost of what it would take for my team to provide that same function, it seemed to me that from a fiscal standpoint, more and more work would be pushed offshore. And I started to question whether or not I'd be able to finish my career in software development or even from a technical infrastructure standpoint. So thinking about what I read from Good to Great, kind of reflecting that back on my own career, I had worked with phenomenal teams and truly exceptional individuals throughout my career. And I asked myself what was the one thing that the people that I respected would come back to me and seek my advice or seek my counsel. And the answer came back: security. And so I had an opportunity to write crypto when I was at Boeing. And so I decided to realign my career, recognizing that you can co-source, you can outsource some responsibilities when it comes to security, but accountability is something that will always remain with the brand or with the company. So I set about trying to kind of realign my career. I did that through obtaining several certifications. Took a little bit of time for me to convince others, because they kind of saw me as either a dev or an infrastructure leader and not really security. And I made that transition in 2005 when I took a role at Amazon, essentially addressing year one significant deficiencies in logical access and change management, and then after that taking Amazon to compliance, PCI compliance, as both a merchant and a service provider. So that was kind of the shift in my career, to move from one discipline to another, and certainly one that wasn't paint by numbers, but was certainly something that, even though it wasn't a guarantee, I look back and it was a seminal moment in my career, and I certainly would not be leading the organization in the capacity that I am today without doing that.
That's great, Dave, and thank you so much for that background and that history. And one of the things that we always get asked of us, when we have a leader like you on, especially from an organization, as you mentioned, that with 50 different countries and all spread out and all the innovation that happens there, is one of the questions we get asked a lot is, how do you balance the security of your brand at the speed at which the business needs to innovate without slowing everything down? How do you keep everything secure, but you're still able to move with the business in a quick manner, in a quick fashion? It's something that often comes up when I've had that question this week, actually, about getting ready for this call.
Yeah, I think so. That's a great question, and I think that is the biggest challenge. I think that there's an element within security on. So outwardly, we will say taking a risk-based approach, but in business terms, I will say that there's an element of pragmatism that needs to balance risk within an organization. So too often, security teams and security leaders see their role as addressing and mitigating all risk. And business at its very core is about the assumption of risk. So recognizing that in order for businesses to succeed, anything that they're going to embark on has elements of risk. And opportunity risk is a risk that needs to be considered as well. If you take too long to execute or deliver, or if it's too costly, you may lose out on that. Or if you're actually blocking an initiative because they failed to address some cyber elements, meanwhile you lose market share or you lose that first mover advantage, that's an opportunity risk that needs to be calculated in. So as such, two things. One is that in certain instances, it is acceptable for security and gaps in security to be a fast follow. They don't always have to be upfront. And so that has to be evaluated, and that's the element of pragmatism that I was talking about. And the second is, I do not believe that the Chief Information Security Officer nor the Cybersecurity Department is the sole entity responsible for all risk. So that is a leadership function. What our role is in the organization is to identify and effectively articulate that risk to the business so that leadership can make an informed decision. So when you look at that, and it kind of changes the perspective of the role to say, we need to uncover risk, we need to bring that forward, and it's our responsibility to ensure that ensure that people understand, one, and ensure that the conversation is had, and that people understand what it is that they're agreeing to.
Yeah, thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure that people are going to find a lot of value in that. Talking about that, you had mentioned that one of the things that's important is to be able to create cybersecurity risk as a leadership function within the organization and be able to communicate the exact risk, what it is, so that leadership can make a decision. And one of the questions that we often get, and one of the points of Professional Development Academy is, the communication. There's a whole communication section in there, and always talking about how to communicate with the business. And so, do you have any best practices or tips, when it comes to, from a security standpoint, being able to convey what the issues are and how to deal with them to people who are not in the security world but are in the leadership role that are making those decisions?
Wow. Yeah. So a lot of it has to do specifically with your organization and with your teams. So I think there are two elements that I want to highlight. One, I'll be a little bit transparent about the organization that I work for currently. Our conversations around risk are still in the early stages. So I will say that risk is a tough concept for businesses in general to grapple with and to address. So we're fairly early in our journey to have true, deep, risk-based conversations. What I find more often than not that is effective within my organization is to describe threat and then threat realized. So we're a storytelling culture. So, identifying a particular threat that has been seen, and maybe using some stories around it, maybe a compare and contrast of another organization or something that they may have seen in the media, and then turning that back within and saying, and if we saw this risk realized within our environment in a certain way, how would we react to that? Would we react the same? Would we react differently? Why is that? And that tends to resonate more with business executives and business leadership because they can understand that. They can kind of put themselves in that circumstance and figure out what to do with it. The other is it's a little bit of human nature. People want options, and so we do have a formalized risk acceptance form. And the nature of the risk acceptance form is such that if we are unable to influence or negotiate to a state where we feel like the needs of the business and the needs of security are both being met. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens on a periodic basis. One of my direct reports will, we have a formalized risk acceptance form, and it is a piece of paper, and that's important, and I'll get to that in a minute. One of my directs will fill out what they believe is the cybersecurity risk of a certain situation. We will have somebody in the business, sponsor, stakeholder, typically director or above, that will fill out the business opportunity and why they believe that the business opportunity outweighs the risk that's identified. The form will then come to me. I will read that. If I believe that there is still substantial cyber risk to the organization, and I don't necessarily agree that the business opportunity outweighs, I will sign as an attestation that I understand that the business opportunity and what it is. I also understand the risk. The risk is true and accurate, and I believe that we need more formal acceptance and buy-in from the enterprise. We will then take one of my SVP counterparts in the business that the director or above that filled out the business opportunity, somebody in their reporting chain, who will then read all of that. Should they still feel that the business opportunity outweighs the cyber risk, they will sign essentially with an attestation saying they understand the business opportunity and the cyber risk and believe that the business opportunity outweighs and that it is true and accurate. It then goes to an EVP. We only have a handful within the company who has to put pen to paper and accept that risk on behalf of Starbucks. And we are about, I will say, of all the risk acceptance that start within the organization, only about 5 to 7% actually get signed at the end of the day. Somewhere within the process, a leader will say, actually, no, we need to address that cyber risk, or this business opportunity isn't as big as people are making it out to be. So I think having that option to work through when there's a deadlock within the process or within the organization is key for cybersecurity to be viewed as truly part of the business and not something that's sitting off to the side.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for that and that insight into your guys' process and the organization. That's really great and great to hear. I have a quick question you'll be able to answer. How long does that process take? The paperwork chain there within your organization. How fast does that move along? We know everyone's busy in every role. I was curious about that.
So the two elements on the cybersecurity side will turn within a day. On the other side, it's all how much motivation and how important the business feels the opportunity is. So you will see the outcome will vary depending on how resolute individuals are. Sometimes those first couple phases, I've gone through the first three phases, right? So security, first level business, and myself all in one day. And then it's gone to the SVP or above in the business, who usually has more questions. They want to talk to their teams. They want to talk to us to kind of understand before they put their name on paper, and it's actually going to an EVP for final signature. I've had several that have gone to EVPs where they're like, absolutely not. Where the business thought this is a huge advantage, and we're not going to have any problem whatsoever. And when it gets to the executive VP level, they're like, no, this is too big of a risk for the enterprise. I'm not putting my name to this, and we're going to go fix we'll delay or we'll postpone until we can address the security item. So your mileage varies depending.
Yeah, obviously. No, thank you for that clarity. I have a question that came in here, a couple of them actually, and they're both really around the same idea. So I'm going to loop them together. And speaking that you're from a global organization where they're assuming that you have team members all across the globe that are in your on your team or a part of the cybersecurity team. They're asking, how do you build that cohesive team across so many different geos, and across the world, and how do you keep everyone on the same page and maintain that global organization as being ready for all the cyber issues that are out there?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. It's not easy. I will tell you that we struggle to hire internationally, not so much in EMEA, but in Asia Pacific, it's been harder. So I have a direct report, an information security officer position. I have one that sits in this building that handles the Americas, both North America and LATAM. I have one that sits in London that deals with EMEA. I have one that sits in Japan, in Tokyo, that deals with just the Japanese market. I have one that sits in Shanghai for China. And then I have an ISO that sits in Hong Kong that deals with the rest of Asia Pacific. And so not all of them, for instance, in Asia Pac, I only have an ISO. There isn't a team there. They primarily work on the joint ventures and licensees. So the model of Starbucks is, so the intro, I have to get you more information for the intro because it's a little bit dated. We operate in 78 countries today. And on an annualized basis, Starbucks only runs about 10 of those markets. They're usually the larger markets. A few are stable. The UK, Canada, America are owned markets. Those don't move a lot. But in the last couple years, we've bought the Japanese market back. We sold Germany. We just sold France and Netherlands. And so there's kind of every year there's kind of this shift of we're selling some markets and we're buying some markets back, which has its own cyber challenge all on its own. But primarily Asia Pacific, the only country, well, actually now we just sold Thailand. So that whole market is nothing but joint ventures and licensees. So other companies running Starbucks within those countries, and my ISO is running the program to ensure their level of security is up to speed. The other markets, I think sourcing is difficult. We have a fairly high bar. We've been fortunate enough to land leaders, and sometimes it's through transplant. So, for instance, my ISO in Hong Kong was in Silicon Valley. He worked for several tech companies there in a security function. but he was born and raised in Hong Kong and wanted to go home. So I gave him the opportunity. I actually hired him, interviewed him here, and then we relocated him back to his country of origin. Same thing with China. The ISO that I have in China was Chinese national, but working in Australia, wanted to go back home, so we were lucky enough to find that individual and then allow him to move back home and have a job when he landed. So that seems to have been a more effective strategy for me than finding talent in country, but not exclusively. Our ISO in both EMEA and Japan are nationals that we hired in market. Likewise, then, I let them build out their team, but it is a blended interview loop. So they'll interview with the local teams for cultural and business fit, for technical fit. That actually comes back to the teams here in the States to ensure that we're maintaining not only the level of quality and competency, but also the mindset of how the program is, how the security program is run, and the element of pragmatism. So they'll walk through that, making sure that they're comfortable with the fact that in certain instances we may say security is a fast follow, and it's not necessarily as black and white as some individuals and organizations operate.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And as kind of a follow-up to that came in on the you mentioned the hiring process a little bit and the interview process. When you are training those people, do they have to come here to the U.S. to get any training, or is it all done virtually, or is the teams on site are trained on how to train? That is something that came up here.
Oh yeah, so twice a year, my ISOs will all come to the U.S. So on a quarterly basis, we bring, so I report up through our CTO, the technology leader. She brings all the technology VPs to the States once a quarter. And I will have my ISOs accompany the technology leader twice a year. So I do that at mid-year, which is essentially our strategy and planning for the next year, and then I'll do it on essentially the first meeting in the new fiscal year. Our fiscal year starts in October. So it's usually like May, October that they'll come to the States, and then I guarantee at least one trip a year that I'll be in all of their markets. And then I usually follow with another one of my directs that will be there in market once a year as well. So if you look at it, there's a quarterly face-to-face that we have with all of the international teams.
Yeah, and do you find that quarterly face-to-face is one of the things that you use kind of to help with retention? Is retention an issue more in certain parts of the world, or is it something that you've been able to mitigate because of the structure you guys have and the benefits?
Yeah, I think I don't see it as pronounced internationally. EMEA is a little bit tough, and we've had a couple of close calls internationally where people had competitive offers. Luckily, they really didn't want to leave, and they allowed us to counter. And it really was just a money play. I'm not a huge advocate of countering because if they're the dissatisfiers that were there that got somebody to look for a job are still going to be there if you get paid more. It's really, what was the sequence of events? How did this land? And is it really just a money consideration on why you would think about leaving? But I haven't seen a lot of that. I think, when I look at talent, from as a three-legged stool. The first being you need to have engaging and interesting work, not just now, but a vision for that as well. Two, it's about the team, the people you work with and the people that you work for. And then lastly, it's about being compensated fairly. So not compensated the most. There's always somebody that will pay more, but the difference between the compensation that you're getting at Starbucks and what people will offer can't be double, right? Can't probably even be 50%. That's too big of a gap. But as long as the gap is manageable and you have the other two items, I don't see individuals leaving. So up until this year, from 2011 to 2018, I have only seen a 2% attrition rate on my teams.
Wow, Dave, that's amazing. Us here in the office here are all kind of saying wow to that. That's really impressive. Kind of switching.
Yeah, well, this year has not been the same. So.
Okay. All right. Kind of switching gears here, we have you're in the program, as I mentioned, in the cybersecurity program especially, and we
Yep.
have you in there. And one of the quotes that gets sent back to us or repeated back on like our live events is one that you've mentioned, which is have a point of view, but don't die on that point of view. People often are bringing that quote up, and I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit of how you came to that idea and kind of what that means to you.
So. Well, and I'll actually even put this in the context of risk when we were talking about that earlier. Where I do not feel like I am the owner of risk for the organization, that is shared across the leadership team. Likewise, I don't just simply walk into the room and say, yeah, there's a big, hairy problem and you guys need to figure it out. I do come with a perspective and I do come with a recommendation and rationale behind that recommendation. And sometimes my recommendation is taken and sometimes it's not. And when it's not, it's at least clear to the room that, okay, well, we had a healthy conversation. We understand what's happening. And although if I was CEO or if I was the ultimate decision maker, I would have made a different decision. That's what the business has chosen, and now I'm 100% in. So I think it's have a perspective, bring that forward, but also be prepared as you're providing that you're not the only voice in the room. And so if for whatever reason you don't win the day and a different decision is made, be comfortable with the fact that even though you may not agree with it, that decision was made, and then get behind that because that's what your company is looking for, right? They're looking for leaders that say, you're not always going to get it your way, and you may not always agree with the direction or the decision made, but the expectation is that you are, it's the difference between consensus and concurrence. And I use this a lot as well. You get 10 people in a room trying to drive consensus, you'll be there for a very long time. But to understand, concurrence is very different, right? You can go with a majority and you say, all right, well, I understand this is the way that you're going, and being able to get behind that and not kind of either grumble about it. Nobody wants to hear somebody say, "I told you so." They'll already understand that that conversation happened and there was a dissenting view. You just want to make sure that you weren't instrumental in undermining that decision. So I think, when it comes to leadership, that's probably the most difficult thing, of being able to truly get behind a decision that maybe you lobbied or argued against, lost the day, but now you're 100% in saying, but I'm behind what the company is doing, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make this successful.
Yes, great. Thank you. Thank you for answering that and expanding on that. I have just a couple more questions here that came in, and then we'll get some final thoughts here. And one of them is, when it comes to cyber defense, do you have any advice for companies that are struggling to establish supplier standards when it comes to cyber readiness? It's a little bit more, less leadership, a little bit more focused here, but do you have any advice for that person on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is something that you're seeing a lot more focus on in the last couple of years. It was so annually I have to do an interview with the underwriters for cyber liability insurance for Starbucks. So I've done that since 2014. And they always have different themes, but third-party cybersecurity or, security of digital supply chain has been a theme for the last couple years. They really want to know what companies are doing about that. Do you have a perspective on the security posture of the organizations that you're doing business with? And I think there's a couple things that we do internally. So we have a program. We use a couple third-party solutions to help round that out. The one thing that I would say, and I think the uniqueness that we've done with our third-party security program is we actually turn it back on ourselves. So we say, if this is the way that we're grading external suppliers, we're also going to use that same process against us, and what does it say about the programs that we run? That actually is integral to the board and board reporting. So when I provide a cybersecurity scorecard on a quarterly basis, the data that comes from those third-party review and scoring providers actually goes back into that scorecard for not only for the markets that we run, the 10 markets that we run, and I can compare and contrast the Japanese market to the UK market or Canada to China and get more granularity. But I also do it for all of the licensees. So the markets that we sold that I talked about earlier, Germany, France, Thailand, I have a score for all of those as well. So we also understand how markets change from a security standpoint, from non-owned to owned and the other way around. So I think as the advice that I would give is it's a tough problem to solve, and it can be equally tough to get organizations excited about establishing the program. But if you use that same program back against yourself, I've found that organizations actually love the additional insights that they get. So if I would tell you to go out, take a look at companies like CyberGRX or BitSight or Security Scorecard. Figure out how you can integrate those into your third-party program for continuous review. And then don't just stop there, but then use that back on against yourself for increased value and increased insights.
Thank you so much. And then I have this is a good question, I think, to kind of bring us to a close here. And it's a two-part question here. What is the one thing that keeps you most excited about being a CISO, and the one thing that keeps you most excited about being a leader at Starbucks?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. So I think being I say this every year. I've been the CISO for Starbucks for 9 years. It was 9 years on May 3rd, which is a pretty long time. I think that I say this every year of, wow, not only are we working on really amazing stuff right now, but the stuff that I see through the windshield right in front of the car for the next year is even more exciting. And I keep kind of expecting at some point that will not be the case. But I haven't found it yet. I think we're in super exciting times.
Oh, I think I lost you, Dave. I'm unable to hear you. I don't know if you moved away from the microphone or if your phone went on mute.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Better?
Yes, definitely. You were talking about the super exciting.
Yep, super exciting times. We are on, I believe in the next couple years that the influence and the value of the role is going to significantly increase. There's some pending legislation that is going to help executive teams and boards recognize that this is an underappreciated and ever increasingly important role, which will trickle through the entire organization. So I think that's super exciting. I also think that with all the transformative and disruptive technologies that are entering the marketplace between things like IoT and ML and AI, we have a huge opportunity. So to kind of double down on ML for a minute, we have built a discipline on 3 core tenets of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And availability we do lightly, and most of the time it's outsourced to infrastructure or at least co-sourced. So we have things, depending on the structure of the organization, business continuity and disaster recovery may or may not be part of the cyber program, which is an example of how you've either outsourced or co-sourced that responsibility. By and large, we've done some things in integrity, but we kind of pick and choose. We really kind of double down on confidentiality. If you take a look at machine learning, and not only the algorithms but the data sets. And if you look at, and there have been several recent examples where through machine learning and either anomalies or gaps within the data set that's used to train the models that are used in ML, the organization gets unintended or incomplete insights and outcomes. So an example of this would be Google Translate. So Google Translate, the algorithm that does Turkish to English in Google Translate. In the Turkish language, there is a single pronoun for personal identifier, he, she, or it. And so when you're translating from Turkish to English, the algorithm needs to determine the gender or which personal pronoun to use. Is it a he? Is it a she? Is it an it? And what was found in 2017 is that the algorithm had unintentionally introduced gender bias, where attributes and professions that are considered desirable would be primarily male. So he is a doctor, she is a nurse. She is pretty, he is very pretty. So it's an example of where the organization has built something, they got an unintended consequence or outcome from the data and from the algorithm. So going back to integrity, this is something that organizations are not dealing with yet, but are going to have to in the next couple years. When you're utilizing technologies such as ML and the organization gets an unintended outcome, who in the organization are they going to look to solve, not only solve the problem, but identify the problem? And given the fact that we've built a profession on confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we shouldn't be surprised if they don't come back to the cybersecurity organization and say, how did this happen? So that's raising the bar for all of us, where, you know, we had to add 3 and 4 GL programming languages to the core competencies of our security teams, Python or Ruby or whatever, as we start moving more to software-defined environments, and we do things like implement SOAR tools that require coding for building playbooks. Now we may need to add business intelligence, analytics, and data science to our bench. So that's super exciting to me, right? Not only from a development and team growth perspective, but also our contribution and our impact to the businesses that we protect.
Yeah, thank you for that. That is really exciting, and, you know, lots of things to think about there in that world. And Dave, I really want to thank you for today. And, you know, if you had any final thoughts that you wanted to share, you know, I'm certainly happy to do that. Is there anything that you want to share with the group before we go?
I applaud this group. I hope that it was valuable. We are, it's a hyper-competitive field, and we do not have enough professionals. So anything that I can do to help grow, I'm certainly going to engage in to grow the talent and leave the profession in a better state than when I entered. Likewise for the group here as bench and that next level that we'll be building, that it's incumbent upon all of us to grow that talent, to build our teams, to grow that talent, and people are going to be looking at you. They're looking at us right now, but that, you know, the next leaders to come, they're going to be looking to you to help them along that journey. So, you know, hopefully, like I said, today was useful.
Yeah, Dave, thank you. Thank you so much. And, you know, thank you for contributing all that you have to our participants, you know, in the form of your videos and your participation in the program, as well as the live events that you've been on with us. And we really appreciate that. And I want to thank all of our participants as well that are on the call today. Really appreciate everyone being here, being able to listen. Again, this is a series you can see here on the screen. You know, our next Executive Insight on Leadership will be Peter Logothetis on July 16th. So if you'd like to be a part of that, maybe looking for that coming into your inbox. Also, you can see right there on the chat box, Alicia just sent out the link for that. So click that link, you can add that to your calendar and be able to put that forward. Again, thank you, Dave, so much for being a part of today. We really appreciate it, and hopefully you have a great day, and congratulations on 9 years. Hopefully many more for you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep, and of course, everyone, you can join us on social media if you'd like to look at more of the Professional Development Academy, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.